everyone, please keep yourselves muted so that we have the right experience from this session. If we notice certain sound feedback or noise, we might go ahead as organizers, we might go ahead and mute yourself, you as well, sorry. And I guess that's gonna be it on the logistics side. If you need to drop off and come back, feel free. We have disabled the waiting room, so you will be able to join right away. And here we go. So regarding today's session, we have a really interesting and burning topic. I know that everyone is really keen on learning about this, and we have all experienced a bunch of good retrospectives that we assume is good, but it's kind of not working. And we have the master of retrospectives, Daria, with us today. Thanks a lot, Daria, for joining us and educating us on this topic. I know you are really passionate on the retrospectives topic, not talking about the overall Scrum. So I'm gonna actually leave the proper introduction to you. And without further ado, I'm gonna pass it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen and I'll start then kind of showing and sharing. We only have, now you should be seeing my screen, right? With webinar Retrospectives That Matter. Okay.
Yep.
So hello everyone, my name is Daria and I've been a Scrum Master for a number of years now, and I started in a non-Agile environment and a completely different position as a content manager back when I was living in France in PayPal. And then the company was transitioning to Agile and Scrum, and I saw the opportunity to move to the Scrum Master role. And then eventually the first experience that I had was how not to do my role. That's what I all learned at the time. And then eventually I really understood how to be a better Scrum Master. And right now, after years of experience and working with that, I am a professional Scrum trainer with scrum.org. And I have a website, scrummaster.com, where I share all of those tips and insights that I gathered over the years. And one of the topics that was really always interesting for me was retrospectives, because I remember when I was it was my first role here in Canada. I was joining the company, and I remember being extremely stressed about every single retrospective that I was running. I would spend days preparing for a retrospective that would last for 1 hour, and I would have pages on pages written down what I'm going to do, what are the steps, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to present all the different topics, and what kind of questions I'm going to ask. And eventually I gathered all this information that I was preparing for my retrospective, and it turned into a book and a tool called Retrospective Poker. So I've always been passionate about retrospectives because I always was thinking about how can I be a better Scrum Master through retrospectives, because I saw it as a way for me to know whether I'm doing a good job. And eventually I saw that a lot of people are struggling with retrospectives because it is a difficult meeting to have. It is a lot of difficult discussions that can come through retrospectives. And I always was thinking back to what is the real reason for a retrospective to be, because we often see that people, whenever we are under stress or pressured, the retrospective is the first thing to go. I would say that if we're under stress, we have absolutely no time, the retrospective is the only meeting I'll have, and I'll ditch everything else, right? So that's kind of my philosophy on retrospective. And the reason for that being is the retrospective is the opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect and adapt. So it's all about continuous improvement. And this is the official place for the team to inspect and adapt. If you go back to the Agile Manifesto and the Agile principles, there is a specific principle that talks about the fact that the team on a regular basis needs to inspect how they're doing and improve. And that's why retrospective for me is such an important meeting and kind of the last one to go, I would say, contrary to the reality of things. right? So if retrospective is so important, if this is the paramount point for the teams to come together and really figure out how can we do better, if we don't have a sprint planning, well, how can we plan better without a sprint planning? That's a perfect place for us to talk about that. How come do we struggle so much with that, right? How come do we not really live up to the purpose of the retrospective in general? And I know that because you're here, of course, we, and me, myself, we have all experienced this terrible retrospectives where things are happening not how we would like them to go. Kind of the retrospective where we just would rather be somewhere else than in that meeting. And I want us to actually think about that experience, and let's think about, well, let's gather all this information, because I want to see some patterns and I want to see some differences. And this is a short exercise where I would actually like to get your input into that. So I have shared a Miro board in the chat in Zoom. It's a link. You should be able to come to the board without logging in. You don't need to have an account. And as you come in, I see some people already joined. As you come in, I would like you to come to this space. And what we're going to do is gather your feedback about what is the worst kind of retrospective that you have ever attended. And we're trying to think about how did it feel, what was happening, what was going on, right? And gather all this information in here. To add a note, what you need to do, you can just drag a sticky note from the left right here. Or I think you can also click N and click. Awesome, that's a new shortcut. And I'll just give you maybe 3 to 4 minutes to do that. Just add a note and one idea per sticky and write down what is the kind of worst retrospective that you have ever attended. What is some experience that you've seen? What was happening? What were people doing? How did it feel? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Any questions about how to use Miro? Or Miro. I never know how to pronounce it. So feel free to just come to the board and just start typing your experiences with retrospectives. Bless you, whoever that was.
Bless you.
Either click N and click, or drag and drop from the left side to add a sticky note. I'll also leave a couple of sticky notes right here. So if you don't know how to add a sticky note, just grab one that is free and start typing your experiences. I'll add a couple. Let me set a timer for 2 more minutes. Once again. Wow, there is a whole story going up there. We'll need to deconstruct it. No, continue typing. I'm just gonna switch it to this because it's easier to read that way. And there you go. We're out of the timer. I know it's good to have a timer on to make sure that we're actually on track. Okay, so let's look at what we have. And what I like to do is that I've run so many of this, and I often see the same things. Every time I run the sessions, people come up with different stories, but they all come back to the same patterns, and I find it very interesting. So what I like to do is trying to group them and find those patterns in what I'm seeing on the board. So a couple of things that I see is related to no engagement, right? I wrote crickets, meaning no one even speaks. Not everyone joined. And then there you go, when no one wants to join or share ideas, right? So I like to group, these are all kind of come back to the same concept. People are not engaged in a retrospective. They don't want to talk, they don't want to share, they don't even want to come to the retrospective. So what's the point of the retrospective if they don't want to be there? Then things like people start blaming each other, or another interesting story from when I was writing retrospectives, where there is a lot of tension and people actually scream at each other in a more, let's say, professional way, but you see the tension that is happening. So those coming together, more of a personal attacks, or it comes to personal kind of, how to say, thinking about the person or the people involved rather than the problem and solving the problem, right? Improvements never happen. This is an interesting one, right? No results from the retrospectives. And here I also want to put this. The Scrum Master does all the improvements. That's something that I definitely saw. And then interesting one here, managers were in and driving the conversations. That's kind of an interesting one as well. I'm gonna put it somewhere here in the middle. And then when the team indicates all the bad without having an agenda of how to make improvements, that comes back to here. We don't see any results from the retrospective, right? And that's kind of comes together. Now I want to look at this story that is right here and see if we can see several things or only one. So the worst retrospective I've ever attended was when I was a project manager. It felt very uncomfortable since that the team was trying to do there was to blame each other and find a responsible person of the failure. So it comes back to the blaming each other and people screaming at each other. And so we can see that their groups are starting to form. And once I had this session with 80 people, I think, and we have had a lot of different notes on the board, and I was able to group it all into maybe 5 or 6 groups. So if I were to look at those and try to name them, I can say, well, this one right here is lack of engagement. Clear. So people are not disengaged. Here it's lack of commitment to actually improving, right? Here I would say something about personal, focused on people rather than problems. Managers, it's an interesting one, and I would say maybe misunderstanding the whole purpose of the retrospective as well. So if we had more things here, it depends on what really is happening in this situation. If the managers are driving the conversation, maybe there is lack of commitment because you need to have a manager there driving the conversation. Or if the managers are there trying to find the responsible person, maybe we're not focusing on solutions enough, right? So as you can see with many different nodes, we can still combine them in pretty much the same problems. And I always see the same problems come up. And I want to do a little reality check for us to looking at that, is that all of these problems come up, lack of commitment, lack of engagement, Well, the reality check is that whenever there is an issue in retrospective, the problem is not the retrospective itself. The problem is outside of the retrospective. So there is an issue in the retrospective, there usually is an issue somewhere else that negatively affects the retrospective. And here I say specifically, it is the job of a Scrum Master to guide the team towards uncovering this issue and addressing it. And I remember whenever I would have a good retrospective, a positive retrospective with a lot of improvements, I would feel good about myself as a Scrum Master. And whenever I would have a bad one, well, I would feel crappy after the retrospective. And over time, I really realized that it's because I felt that I'm actually failing as a Scrum Master, because the retrospective, I started to treat it as my performance review at the end of the sprint. Did I do a good job during the sprint as a Scrum Master so that the retrospective is going well? And obviously it's a pretty hard thing to realize, because there are a lot of things that might impact the retrospective, but at the end of the day, even if it happens in the retrospective, that's something that you need to be addressing outside of the retrospective itself. If you see a lot of blaming happening, well, there might be a lack of respect between the team members in the organization. If managers are there, well, maybe the organization doesn't understand that they shouldn't be there. They don't understand the retrospective. As a Scrum Master, you need to help the organization understand Scrum, right? And what the retrospective is all about. So that's an important point in here, as to say, use the retrospective as your way to uncover issues, and use the rest of the time as your way to address them, with the help of the team or by yourself, depending on what kind of issues you're having, right? So let's start into thinking about how can you really use your retrospective to your advantage. Now, the point is not to have a positive retrospective every time. It's more to help you uncover the issues. So here I start with looking at the stages of the retrospective. What can you do to actually make the retrospective productive and more focused on improvements? And I guess everybody knows this book, Agile Retrospectives, right? And the 5 stages of retrospective. When initially I was looking at this book, I kind of looked to it and saying, well, how can I use all of these techniques, great techniques in this book, to help me as a Scrum Master? And it was going through the 5 stages. Set the stage, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, and close. And when I was reading this book, when I was still kind of new, figuring out how to run retrospectives, I found it difficult to figure out how do you combine all of these things and techniques into one, so that I can run my retrospectives more productively, because every stage in the book, it has different techniques that you can use. So I turned it around. I said, this makes sense. We definitely need to gather data and generate insights, and of course, decide what to do. But it wasn't enough for me to go on, because it wasn't giving me the kind of results in the retrospective that I wanted to. So what I did is I took those stages of the retrospective and I said, how can I deconstruct them and make them more usable for many different ways of how I want to run the retrospective? And what I came up with is something that I use personally in any retrospective that I go through, and that goes still through the stages. So these are the easy steps that you can run any retrospective. And then let's look at what I have, right? And how they all combine with each other. The first thing I always do in a retrospective is review the action items from the previous retrospective. You remember one of the areas that we combined there at the top, right? So go back. It was lack of commitment. Improvements never happen, or Scrum Master does all the improvements, or nothing actually changes, and the team does not commit to improvements. Well, I said, how can I bring the retrospective back to being focused on improvements? I started reviewing the action items from the last retrospective. And that is always the first thing to do. So that's an expectation from the team. We know that we're going to come in and we need to talk about what we did since last retrospective. So we're more aware of the need for doing something. And then I started thinking, how can I do it in a more focused way? And here I talk about things like formats and techniques, right? And I realized that using different formats and techniques in a retrospective can give me a much better result of uncovering issues and focusing on solutions. So here you see that the part 2 and 3 are more specific to techniques, and I will talk about this in more detail in the next slides. And these techniques help me set the stage, and then I start gathering data and generating insights. And as we go through the retrospective and go towards the end, we talk about the action items that we're going to do in the sprint, and then we ask someone to volunteer to drive those actions. If you look at my 6-step plan, you can see that 3 steps out of 6 are about action items, right? And that's where I want the focus to be of the retrospective. Yes, I do want to vary the retrospective. I want to use different techniques. I want to set the stage properly and close the retrospective. But 3 of the items that I have here are actually about deciding what to do, deciding on what did we do since last retrospective and what we're going to do in the next one, and who is going to be responsible or who is going to be driving the action. And here I want to kind of highlight the action driver point here is, I say here, ask for volunteers to drive actions. It's not about the person doing the action, because you remember we're a team, we're a Scrum team, and the team is successful when the team is actually focused and on the team goals instead of their individual ones. So instead of saying you or someone volunteering for being the designated person to complete the action that we say decided in a retrospective, we say you're the action driver, meaning it's still the whole team's responsibility to make this improvement, but we designate you to help us remember that we need to do that improvement, right? You're not the solely responsible person for for completing the action that we have decided on, but you are there to remind us that we need to do it and drive this action for the team and help the team actually get to making this improvement happen. So I like to separate the fact between the assigning someone on an action item that we decided in retrospective to having someone drive this action while the team is still responsible for the improvement, right? So that we separate we create a little bit more commitment on a team basis. So let's talk about retrospective techniques. I covered this there. I was talking about retrospective techniques, and you might be asking yourself, what is that? Well, I talked about the tool I created was the retrospective poker, and that is exactly that. It's a tool that has 20 different techniques, and a retrospective technique is just a different way to run the whole retrospective from start to finish. And here you might see the items that you maybe already know about, right? The hot air balloon, the starfish, the sailboat, kind of the regular retrospective formats that we would think about. And I assume some of you already run different types of these retrospectives. I still wrap it around my stages of the retrospective. I still wrap it around in different actions, right? We talk about actions. I can run the retrospective technique in a different format, but I never leave it without this wrapper where we talk about actions and where we decide who's going to be driving them. So that's kind of what the retrospective technique is. And I found that when I was switching retrospective techniques, I was seeing much better results with the teams. And I was able to address specific concerns that I was having in the retrospectives, some of the things that we discussed and looked at right there at the beginning by using different retrospective techniques. And here is why. When you use a different retrospective technique, and I wish I had something to uncover it one by one, but let's start with the first one. So when you introduce a different technique, say a sailboat versus a hot air balloon, you give new views and new results, right? The people start to look at the same problems from different angles. So the problems like a boring retrospective, or I have no ideas, I don't know what to contribute to this retrospective, this can be solved through introducing different techniques. We ask different types of questions, and we create this more of a creativity within the teams just by asking different questions. It has increased engagement, right? Obviously, we talked about no engagement. If you're using different techniques every single time, then you can recreate this engagement. How is it happening? Because it actually is a story of mine when I was working with the team. And I remember when I joined the team, they didn't really have retrospectives. Their retrospectives lasted 15 minutes before the sprint review for whatever reason. And they just talked about how they felt on the scale of 1 to 5. And then that was it. That was their retrospective. And when I came in, I said, well, we are going to be running retrospectives. I'm going to be introducing some of the techniques. It was in a bank, kind of an older group of people. And they said, oh, that's all fun and games, but we don't have time for that. And eventually, it was interesting that people got really excited to go to the retrospective because they never knew what kind of technique I'm going to be using, what kind of questions I'm going to be asking them. And they were extremely engaged in just going. Every Friday, our retrospectives were on Friday, end of sprint. I'd be like, so what are we going to be doing today? What are the questions you're going to ask us, right? So they were extremely excited to go because it was a surprise. They knew it's going to be serious, but they also knew that there will be a fun aspect in every retrospective that I'm going to be presenting. So it really increased engagement because of the change I was presenting with different techniques. Another good point, I'm on line 3 here, personalized focused approach. So when we use different techniques, we can choose the technique that will help us focus everyone's attention on the problems we know they should be addressing. And it helps us to reduce this personal comments and personal attacks, something that we saw, people blaming each other. With different techniques, we can actually move the discussion away from those and reduce the off-topic discussions in general, because we will be using the technique that will be asking the questions that people need to answer. If we know that our team has problems with looking into or planning into the future, we can use a retrospective that has a future-respective aspect in it, right? So we'll be focusing on attention of the people on what really matters to them. And that way, the need for off-topic discussion because they're out of ideas will be reduced. Now, there is potential for metrics. I'm on line 4 here. Potential for metrics is there are certain techniques that I'm going to give you right in the next slide. If you're using a technique that allows people to estimate or evaluate, I'd say, different areas, aspects of their work, if you do it today and then you do the same technique, say, in 3 months, you can collect some metrics around how you're doing. Right? You can see the trends. Are we improving on this aspect? Because we run this retrospective 3 months ago. Are we actually improving on this aspect? And it can show results for people. It can show actual positive results on whether the team is improving on certain aspects. And for people who are more numbers driven, it will be perfect, right? And this is something that you can even use when you talk to management. When they ask you, what is the point of this retrospectives? Is the whole team sitting there for 1 hour, just airing their grievances? Is it really the point? Well, now you have metrics that you can show some tangible results. And so that is really, really good. And of course, it's fun. And I talk about the lack of trust as the challenge that it can help you with. And I do believe that when we are working as a team, if we do not have kind of a natural tendency to go out for coffees, especially now, we're kind of constrained, right? We can't really have this discussions, non-work oriented discussions with our colleagues. Well, when you bring in different techniques and you make it fun and you try to switch it around a little bit, you can start building trust within the team, because you will be reducing that work pressure, at least for maybe 10-15 minutes at the beginning of the discussion, just because you're introducing something new, just because it's fun. And you can start building trust and respect within your team with that. So I do believe that when you choose different techniques, you can really achieve great results and focus on talking about topics that really matter for your team to focus on. Just a couple of examples. As I talked about hot air balloon, sailboat, starfish, but what I want to highlight here is below, I'm talking about the differences between them. Sometimes we just take a technique without thinking about why we're doing that. We just want a different technique, but it's important to think about why you're taking this particular technique. For example, hot air balloon helps you review the past sprint and use this information to project into the future. Versus a sailboat, it's about internal versus external factors, right? So you can choose which technique makes sense for you. Starfish allows to focus on the action items right away. This is a good technique to use with a mature team. Instead of having the brainstorm around the problems and things like that, I found Starfish work really well with people who already know what the problems are, and they just want to talk about solutions right away. Well, that is a go-to technique to use. Squat health check, that's from Spotify, something that I adapted to my team, and you can do too. This is a technique that you can really use with your team to collect some metrics, because it gives you a list of different areas to evaluate, and then each person in the team can evaluate, is it a 1 out of 3, 3 out of 3, 2 out of 3? And then you collect these numbers and you can calculate what is the average evaluation for different areas, and then talk about the areas that need help immediately and see that as a holistic view of what is happening, and redo this check 3 months from now to see whether you're improving on those areas. And good thing is that while the Spotify technique itself already gives you some areas of evaluation, you can adapt that and change it completely and create your own list of areas that you would like to evaluate. And high performance tree is a great technique if you want to really help the team understand Scrum. It comes from the Coaching Agile team's book. And I think on InfoQ, they have a free chapter that is that you can read through that talks about high performance tree. It is not initially a retrospective technique, but it can be turned into a retrospective technique, because it talks about Scrum values as the roots of a tree that gives us a good and strong foundation for a team. Then as the roots are strong, our tree starts to grow and it sprouts leaves. And the leaves are, if they're getting enough sunlight, right? If the leaves are getting enough sunlight, then we are starting to get the characteristics of high performing teams, such as team members trust each other, for example. They have healthy conflict. They're focused on high quality, right? So those are the characteristics of a high performing team. And then when the leaves are getting enough sunlight and the tree is strong, then we are starting to get results, the fruits, right? And the fruits are the results of a high-performing team, as in great products, more frequent delivery, right? All those things. And as you present this tree, now you can turn it into a retrospective and ask, well, where are our roots weak? Scrum values. Are we really following our Scrum values? Are all of our leaves getting enough sunlight? Are any fruits have stale taste, right? So we're talking about the values, the characteristics, and the results. And it can be turned into a retrospective and a learning moment for a team. So that's something that you could use with a new team. to teach them more about Scrum and the results that you would like to eventually help them get to. I've been talking for a really long time now. And I want to ask you, as we're sitting on this slide, actually, are there any other techniques that you know of that you would add to this list? And I'm going to bring everyone to me. If you're in Miro, then you could add some notes. Techniques that you have already run, and how did it go?
Daria, do you want sticky notes on this screen?
Yes, yes, if people have, or you can speak up as well.
Yeah, that's great. It will be nice to learn about other people's experience. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself.
No other techniques. I'm kind of surprised because it's so easy to find different techniques online. Have you seen maybe a particular technique that really worked for your team?
I guess I'm gonna share an experiment that I did with my team. Not that recently. I guess it was right before the pandemic, if I'm not wrong. So not sure if there is a technique like that or not, but we try to keep it on a positive note and come up with ideas. What does the ideal sprint look like for us in terms of everything, behavior, relationship, and also the process, anything that we can put in one sprint? What does the ideal one look like? And actually it was interesting, the outcome. We already had these ideas of the improvement as we were crafting the ideal sprint for us.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, but the techniques that you mentioned here are really great. And just on the note, I really love your cards. They are very handy because even when you think that, oh, well, what am I doing with this team today? Which one should I run? It's really, really handy when you have the deck next to you and you go like, oh, yeah, I kind of forgot about this one, or I am in a mood and this is the right fit for this team during this retrospective.
Yeah, the cards are, that's kind of the whole point of them, is just expand this tool set for a Scrum Master. Yeah.
We are practicing the 4 L's in our team. Oh, am I muted?
No, I can hear you.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So yeah, the 4 L's, which
is liked.
Very good. Liked, learned, lacked, and longed for. So this is what we are collecting data from the team.
Yeah, it's a good one. Like the easy one, the timeline is a good one. So there are many things that you can look into and find, right? As long as you keep to the framework of the retrospective, and then you can change things inside of the retrospective by using different techniques. Yeah. I think I have another slide. Yes, this one I added after actually all the pandemic happened, of course, is thinking about the remote facilitation tips. Now, don't take this webinar as the example of a facilitation because this is more of a presentation rather than facilitation. But running retrospectives remotely, you can still have really good results. And I've been doing retrospectives remotely using tools like Miro with a lot of success and a lot of engagement. And here are my tips. I have only 5, but they're key. And the first one is preparation. So as you can see right here, I have my list of slides or places to actually, for people to collaborate. And if you're preparing a retrospective, you can just jump in a remote retrospective on a blank screen and just start doing things, especially if you want to use a specific technique. So preparation is definitely the most important part, so that when people join, they already have everything there, right? They have all of the details, all the questions, everything's on the board, and they can immediately understand how to participate properly. Then working agreements is important. I found it very useful for me during the classes that I run. Definitely is be very specific about it. Is everyone supposed to be on camera? What about being mute, unmute? When do you speak, right? So do you need to have breaks in between, right? People can't really be focused for longer than 40 minutes, 1 hour. So usually you would need to have a break if you have a longer meeting, right? Do not have a review and then a retrospective that starts right after, right? You might not get the same results. So having set up working agreements is important. Collaborative space, I do try to include it in this webinar, even though it's difficult, especially with bigger groups, but at least kind of asking you to add your ideas and notes at the beginning and share your experiences. So always think about collaborative space where people can really collaborate and not just talk to a microphone, right? So a visual collaborative space, and visible and clear, always have everything written down, whether it's a question, right? If you ask a specific question during the retrospective, have it written down. Don't just say it, right, out loud, because people might not miss it, might not hear it, right? So always make sure that everything's written down whenever you are facilitating a retrospective online. And ideally have small groups. If you're using Zoom, you can use breakout rooms. That helps a lot. If you have a bigger audience in a retrospective, I would say that the ideal size for a group would be 3-4 people max. If you have more people in the group, then the discussion will be less valuable for the people in the group, because 5 people remotely is already more difficult for them to participate, for all of the people to participate in the discussion. So if you're having breakout rooms, think about kind of smaller groups. And I think those are all of my tips. So I'm gonna once again try to use my collaborative space and invite everyone to put their key takeaways from everything that I've been talking about, unless you fell asleep, of course. So just add some notes with your key takeaways. Okay. Thank you for sharing. And this is something that can stay with you basically as an expert from the session, as an opportunity to always come back and remember what are some of the things that I talked about in this key takeaways. And the last thing I still have 2 more slides. Yes, I wanted to talk about my workshop, of course, and some of the other resources that I have for retrospectives and for Scrum Masters. And I do have a Master in Retrospectives one-day workshop that I will be planning for September. There is no dates for yet, but just a great way for you to learn even more about retrospectives and how to run it. And Arif was a lucky participant on one of my retrospective workshops recently in June. And I'm planning on doing that more. And right now it is a one-day workshop, but sometimes split it out to allow people from different time zones to join at different times and attend this workshop. So most likely in September, I will be planning another one where I really deep dive into much more specific topics about the not only the retrospective itself, but also how to build the right values, Scrum values in your organization and in your team to help your team succeed, right? And retrospective as being one of the ways to do that. So as you can see, I had been really positive feedback on it so far and would love to continue growing this workshop as I go. But I also have some other resources that you can always look up at scrummaster.com website. And one of them is the retrospective poker as well, that right now only exists in a physical form. I know we're all now online and virtual, and I definitely should be transforming it into a virtual tool, but right now it's in a physical form because the idea behind the product was always to have it something tangible in your hands. And it's in cards, and cards are cool, as I like to say, and it's just good to play with something. And eventually when we go back to the office, it's a great tool to bring and help your team to use. It has 20 different techniques and has an accompanying book. And the book actually does exist in an electronic version, so you can go with the book if this is something that you want to learn more about, and have different techniques that I have developed myself and used with my teams with a lot of success. And I also have a lot of free resources that you can look up as the different downloads and insightful emails that I share with my subscribers. And I'm also thinking of potentially in the future, soon, hopefully opening a membership site where we can all have discussions in forums and have a more of a focused discussions around the Scrum Master role, different topics, and potential office hours and regular meetups and things like that. So that's some of the things that you can find on my website. That is it.
Great. Thank you, Daria. Thank you so much for delivering this great speech to us, to our community.
Thank you. Like, I really would like to say a really quick thing about the workshop that I attended, the one that you made really perfect, not only time-wise, but also the delivery and the value you're getting from the workshop is amazing, because every time you feel like, oh, well, it's just about retrospectives. I know kind of the Scrum, I know the values, I know principles, and well, my retrospectives are fine. This workshop is a great place to be to actually reveal the amount that you don't know, or the value that you can bring actually to your team. That was a rare gem for me to participate in that workshop. I was really surprised on the things that ready techniques that you can actually bring to your team and go ahead. And the transformation you see in your team, in your retrospectives, is really amazing. So thank you for that as well. And thanks a lot. We really appreciate you being here, sharing your knowledge and time with us. And we're going to wish you good luck on your journey as well. I know you do a lot for Toronto Agile community, and now you're actually spreading it worldwide. That's amazing. Thanks a lot on that.
Thank you.
And to the community, okay, yeah, one quick question to you, Daria. Will we get the slides or an exported version that we can share
Yes.
with? Okay, that's great.
Yes.
So on that note, people, thank you for being here. I hope that you got really good takeaways from this session. We are going to share the recording. We are going to share the slides. And yeah, if you want to give any feedback, feel free to unmute yourself. This is the time that I'm not going to mute you back. Feel free to unmute and say your thank yous. Okay.
I would like to thank you. Thanks a lot, Daria. I have learned a lot of things. I'm relatively new in this area, so more I would like to ask you questions. So being new in this area, what would you suggest me to start with? I mean, the books, articles, video tutorials, something like that for the new one, because I can see a lot of materials and I'm just like, I'm feeling like a small fish in this ocean, and I don't understand what to do, where to start from.
Yeah, no, I understand you're being overwhelmed. I always send people to scrum.org, honestly, because it's a great resource. And if you go to scrum.org and you go to resources for Scrum Masters, you can start learning more. It's more, I guess it would be more theoretical here, but at least start here. And then you can go into the community and blog, and all of the blogs and all of the information that is provided here is curated, and it's created by Scrum trainers. So you can trust it and believe in it, because it's very high quality, and you can find things about every single event in Scrum. Now we more and more think about how do we provide more practical advice around how to create a sprint goal. One of the trainers recently created some examples and ways to help Scrum Masters create sprint goals and help their teams create sprint goals. Then there's a lot of posts about definition of done, things like that. So I definitely recommend going here. And if you go to my website, I also have some things that is called the action plan. If I can find it, maybe not. But on my website, I have some of the downloads. I have an action plan for Scrum Masters. I have the 7-day email course that you can sign up for, that gives you some action items to do for you on a daily basis. And if I go here, I do have the things that you can use, such as the daily Scrum, for example, daily Scrum poster, or in a way, it's also a way for you to, how do you make sure that your daily Scrum or your sprint goal is doing good, or retrospective. So kind of share ideas like that you can read. And yeah, this is the action plan that can also be helpful. So yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Do we have any other questions? Thanks, Lucina. That was a really good one. Okay.
I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you, Daria. It was like a very interesting presentation of the retrospective and how important it is, and like the different techniques, or maybe how we should approach a retrospective rather than like being it implemented. And like I'm very thankful for all of that, and I would really like to see you again. Maybe Arif can like organize that, and like maybe you can share some of your experience in the other Scrum events, and like continue this and see you around more often. I'm a very big fan of you, so it was very like
thank you.
heartwarming for me to see you live and be able to thank you live.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. So what we're gonna do, whenever we have anything, whenever Daria posts her courses, I will make sure to post it in our community as well. Since we are in a virtual setting, that's really good. Well, we can have an opportunity to join those trainings virtually, so we can use it. So definitely, yes, I will share anything that comes regarding the courses that Daria has there. Yeah, we'll be sharing in our community.
I do have an event tomorrow at 3 p.m. though, our time. So I don't know what time it will be.
It's gonna be 11 p.m. in the evening there.
That's a normal working hour for us.
For me, it's a great time.
I'll be there.
No one will disturb me.
Yeah, maybe we should actually share that and see if people want to join, they can.
Yeah.
I'll surely join.
Yeah, once on the website you can find it. At the very top, this is the one. So this will be much more facilitated. It won't be a presentation. So yeah, it's more for people to.
Perfect. Okay. See you there then.
Okay, then thanks a lot again to everyone and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for
Bye.
such an interesting representation. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.